experience there. When putting together a business plan to pitch to VCs, obviously you go through a number of scenarios. What's your opinion about how aggressive to make it? In other words, you can make it very aggressive, look at making mass returns and take big risks, or you can be more realistic, slower pace, less exciting, but more likely to happen. So what's your opinion about how you'd like to see the business plans? Because this was one of the things that I think was important to me, and what do you want to see? Do you want to see realism or do you want to see excitement, I suppose?
Very good question to start.
I don't mind taking
Yeah.
a slightly different take on that question. When I look at a business plan that's been sent in, I don't look at the projections. The question in my mind is this person worth meeting? So actually, I would argue your commitment objective in sending me that plan is to get a meeting. To do that, I'd encourage you to explain very clearly who you are, what you've done, what you've achieved, and then in terms of the idea, what's unique about it, and also what you've done with it since you had it. Those are the sorts of areas that I'll focus on. And as I said, what's going through my mind as I sort of scroll down through a plan, we're getting quite a lot of them at the moment, is, should I give this person an hour of my time? That's a helpful answer.
Anybody else want to chip in?
I think I might say it's quite challenging. It depends who you're talking to. You talk to the guys over the other side of the pond in the US, I say you've got to be as aggressive and as bullish as possible. If you're talking to us Brits, we tend to be dour and pessimistic. I think what I would say in all forecasts is have a sense of realism. Is know what your growth rates are. Have the story when we do at least come talk to you about them and challenge you on your revenue projections, your cost projections. Make sure there's a sense of realism, and even if you are putting in a bullish case, make sure you've got your pessimistic case in your back pocket. Know the answers to the questions we're going to ask. We're going to ask some basic questions. What happens if things slips? Because we all know it slips. We all know there's externalities that are outside your control. So just know the basic answers to those questions. Because then it will comfort for us that you thought through them.
Yeah, I want both. I want ambition and I want something that can scale to be really big, but I want some pretty pragmatic realism about what it takes to get you there. So that's not very helpful, sorry.
We like our cake and eat it, basically.
So you want choice then?
Realism, I think, is the key thing. We're back in growth businesses, and growth comes in a number of guises, but at the end of the day, bottom line is realism.
How do you get realism if it's something new? You don't really, you're guessing in one respect.
I challenge that, I suppose. There is new products, but especially in my case, they're usually penetrating existing markets and existing barriers. And we all know sort of basic technology adoption cycles. And so yes, it's always the new side, the challenge you don't know, the known unknown, should we say, things go wrong. But you can make some rough estimates usually based other technologies or other adoption cycles.
Any more? What's the second question? There we go.
Hi there, Graham Davis, University of Manchester, Intellectual Property. So we have a lot of businesses which are very early stage, but some of which hopefully will be relevant to you. We obviously have an existing investor at least, if not more. My question is, what's your strategy for how we manage our existing investor and how we approach you? And what's the order in which we do that?
That's technical. I mean, in a sense, strictly speaking, we're not supposed to be displacing other investors. So that is an interesting question. Ideally, I'd like you to come to me after you've raised money from someone else and they've run out. but I think in practice, we've got co-investment targets to hit, but we've also got to be careful not to be replacing other sources of finance. So if there are other sources of finance available, we need to be a bit careful about displacing them as investors.
So is it last resort finance?
That's a good question.
It's gap finance.
It's gap finance.
Which is, we're not supposed to compete directly with the private sector. So there has to be a gap. Maybe the gap is because the private sector won't invest at all, or it might be because the private sector will only invest a proportion of what it would. So it's filling that gap. And that's what I said where we're on the market at the moment, the gap's probably moving around a bit. So it's very difficult to get your sniper's rifle out and hit it. So yeah, it is about that. I'm sure there are businesses which have had previous rounds of funding where investors either no longer want to invest or can invest. And if that's the situation, that falls into the gap.
Do you have a common list of due diligence?
Can I just go back on Graham, come on to that? Graham, we work together at the University of Manchester, and my understanding is the UMIT Premier Fund has a right of first look at any project. So we would seek to disturb that, and I would imagine that you or they would bring projects to us either because they decided it wasn't appropriate for them, or because they wanted to invest but would like to see someone else coming in with them. And that answers the question.
I suppose the different stance on that, especially in the energy environment, it's quite a heavily regulated sector. It's like UMIT's coming in as a generalist investor, and the companies might not be ready for venture investment. I mean, we have knowledge and access to other grant programs, advisory programs, and they might not yet be ready, fully formed business plan. It might be 2, 3, even 6 months away from fundraising. Just touching base and saying, well, this is the concept, and saying, well, actually, this is what you need to work on. This is where you need to get to get the wider private sector interest. Oh, and by the way, you might want to talk to X, Y, Z sort of grant funding program or business advice for free. Because that helps me. I can sort of watch the business grow over a period, get up to speed with UMIT and say, well, how do we address these uncertainty issues? And hopefully find somebody else to pay for it for free, which then is a win for the company.
Right, Rodney, you had a question? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Rodney Jackson, Kojak. I'm interested in what's involved in the due diligence and whether there's a commonality of what we should prepare, because I'm thinking if one could do that, one would save a lot of time in the process. Not that we don't do the due diligence, but we could prepare everything and make sure we've got it ready and not stop and delay supply this like that.
You might say my reaction to that question is that actually I think you'll find, and I might be proved wrong, but the individual funds will have different areas they'd like to due diligence. For example, I know that Andrew, as he said before, it's going to be about IP, it's about market potential. Richard was clearly very keen on management. So you might find, maybe each fund will have their own checklist, their own kind of hot topics, but across the piece, I suspect it will be different.
It's not necessarily each fund, it's each investment. Some investment opportunities you're looking at, the area where you may be concerned is in the market and you would want to do more thorough due diligence in that area than another investment where it could be the management or it could be the technology. So there isn't a sort of ABC of, well, do all of the tick boxes and there's the due diligence done. When you come to an opportunity, unfortunately nothing's well-rounded, and you want to look at specific areas where you're uncomfortable or where you have a concern or where you perceive the biggest risk is.
I think also it's not just what we're looking at, but the extent, the depth to which you're looking at due diligence, and whether or not something is a major risk and requires extensive review, or whether or not a simple reference might deal with it. So you could prepare something and prepare a Bible of documentation and research and incur time and cost, when actually we may be less concerned about it and we can address the matter very directly and in a very efficient fashion. So I think if you were to go with a Bible of prepared due diligence, it may not be enough, or it may quite possibly be far too much.
Still not sure.
Right, next question. Right.
I'm Danny Walker from the IT Fund. We're 5 years old, so we're no longer sort of officially seed, I guess. What I'm interested in is the panel's definition of mentoring. It's been mentioned a few times through the presentations that you did initially. Can you tell me about your involvement once the investment's been made and how you sort of manage your investment?
It varies from, I think, anything from a crying on the shoulder in a bar over a drink through to being a director on a board and thinking of very serious regulatory and health and safety issues. And whether it's us or whether it's experts in the field that we introduce as mentors or advisors. It is quite a wide, broad scope, and it depends on that roller coaster ride of the companies going through, the management teams going through, where they are in that cycle. I think when I spend most of my time actually with companies on a generalist basis, they're either building management teams or working on sales strategies and introducing companies in the right direction. I certainly don't run the businesses. I certainly have my own business to run. But that's the sort of cycle of sort of involvement.
One area where, again, I alluded to it in the presentation, where we think we do add value is introducing people who have either done something similar before, can add in terms of market access, can add to complement skills which aren't there as part of the management team. Ideally on the management team you would like a finance guy, a marketing guy, someone strong on the product, someone strong on operations, and unfortunately we don't often see that well-rounded, well-experienced teams in a lot of opportunities. But what we can do is sort of bring along, whether it's an NED or actually sometimes putting on someone on a full-time basis, is complement that team. So it goes back to one of Richard's points about, you know, you're in part shaping the opportunity by trying to leverage on your existing experience and contact.
Next question. Gareth.
Hi, I'm Gareth from Star. We make delightful content tools and stories that improve people's lives. There's a question really for David. We're an established business, we've been going for 10 years. Say we come to you with a collection of our great ideas and you invested £100,000 and at the end of that £100,000 it's not a goer. What happens next?
Well, if we don't do anything about it, we remain a minority shareholder and potentially a loan note holder ad infinitum, which doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make the fund rich, and it probably doesn't encourage cooperative behaviour between investee and investor. Also, the master fund needs its money back by a long stop date. There's two ways. One is just to say, look, if it isn't really hurting anybody, then just let it ride. The other, the obvious opportunity is at some point to have a mature discussion about taking it back out again at an appropriate valuation, which is why it sometimes takes a little time to resolve the situation when that happens. Anyway, I'm sure that wouldn't happen. Great things would result.
Next one. Come on, guys, you must have loads of questions.
Phil Hall, lawyer. Going back to the due diligence, normally venture capital funds charge associated fees from your side to the company who's doing the diligence on. How does that work in this fund, especially for the small amounts, like the 50k, 100k amounts? Get the money and pay most of it back.
Shall I take that? Because I mentioned the 50 to 100k, I also put it along the lines of a light touch, and we're going to have to think very, very carefully about that. A lot of the due diligence, there's a limit. If you're only investing 50 to 100k, it's possibly only a business plan and a couple of people who want to develop a business. What is there to look at? You know, market opportunity and so on. Well, I could run a market report, and you're right, that would consume 50k right away, so we can't do that. And I think where we're going to end up is having to do an awful lot of it ourselves. We've got good in-house resources, using guys with business, LSE business degrees in London and so on. Bright fellows can do that to help work with the team to develop a good outline on the market, for example. Taking trade references, and Richard and I are looking at something today, we're getting incredibly useful data from trade partners of the individuals. So all I would say is there's a limited amount to look at. A lot of it we can do in-house. Some of it would have to be done at expense by basic legal due diligence, perhaps. But again, there's very little to look at. How much is that going to cost? It's got to be the right solution for the situation. It's got to be cost effective. We're acutely aware of that.